Hi everyone! Welcome back to my channel. So for the last year, I've been playing this game called Limbus Company. To say I play it is an understatement. I'm pretty sure I spend on average an hour per day playing this game, and it is one of those few free-to-play games where I spend my hard-earned cash to pull for characters and advance in the game. It is a really nice game with super interesting lore, and after seeing the release of this new character a while ago, I became motivated to, basically make fan art. I have never really made fan art before. I was mostly doing watercolor and making the more traditional kind of paintings, but I really like this character. It has that air of mysticism and fanaticism that is what I'm really interested in right now, and I'm not going to use watercolor because it is just not the right fit. Instead, I'm going to use these Sakura liner pens that I've bought a year ago. These are Sakura Pigma Micron markers. They come in a variety of line sizes. I just have this because they are super common where I am. Even your run-of-the-mill bookshops that don't carry art supplies or fancy fountain pens will sell these markers. I haven't used them much since I bought them, in part because I haven't been doing a lot of pen drawings these days, and also because I've acquired quite a lot of inks, bottled inks, in the past few months and have been really having a lot of fun playing with those instead. Now, these pens are waterproof, they're supposed to be permanent, they are archival, so that's just what I'm going to use today, and I don't like leaving my art supplies sitting around untouched, so I think it's just a super good opportunity to make use of these markers. And I'm also going to use some glitter paint I bought a while ago. So one of the very first videos I posted on this channel was me doing swatches of that palette. I really like shimmery and metallic paints, just the way they catch and reflect the light make me feel happy. I haven't had much chance to use them as well since then, so I am super excited to try them out again today. Back to the drawing. So I have already sketched out a draft. So this was done using a Stabilo 2B pencil. It was fairly quick, and I just make sure that this is a clean draft where there are no sketches or unnecessary lines. This is important because when going over these lines with a pen, not having any unnecessary lines really allows me to concentrate on making the lines really good looking instead of thinking about which of the pencil sketches on the paper is the correct line to trace over. So the first part that I'm drawing is this eye that is in front of her face. So for you who might be unfamiliar with the game, this is the distorted version of her power. Her normal form is pretty human-like. In the game, there's also this attribute called sanity, so if that drops too low, the character becomes distorted. So their appearance change and they even start hitting their own teammates instead of the enemy character. So it's pretty badass. I haven't seen much games with this kind of mechanics, but I digress. So I start with this eye because it is a central focus of the piece. It is also the hardest because it is almost a negative drawing where I am using the black lines to create a white line. So it requires a lot of control to ensure that the lines are close but not too close, and they need to be straight. So if I end up making mistakes on this part, then I would have to redo from the start. So I would much rather prefer just to redo without having to waste all my efforts doing the other parts of the painting. That's probably one thing that I am envious of people using the digital medium. It's so much more forgiving with mistakes. You can always use the undo button, select the section that you're not happy with, you can resize it, remove it, you can change colors. Meanwhile, with watercolors and pens, whatever you put down is what you are going to get. You could make some minor correction, but they have to be minor so that it is not obvious. And even for pencils, although you can erase pencil markings, you do have to redraw everything instead of being able to quickly modify it like the size as you would for a digital painting. So this might not be obvious from the video, but I am gripping the pen really tightly so that I can exert the utmost control to draw lines that are really smooth without kinks and or even thickness. And I was also really afraid of making a mistake, so I was just gripping it so hard that my hand was getting tired. It got tired after just 10 minutes. So I think the next time I do this, I need to practice holding with a lighter pressure, but still sort of having that tight control over where the pen nib goes. So as I get more of the outlines done, I started working on the colors. I've always intended for this to be a black and white picture, so black is all I'm going to use. In fact, I've got a brush tip pen from the same brand that will help with coloring and make the process move along faster. Since this is going to be a rather flat image, I won't be adding any shading or cross-hatching that sometimes people do to line art. For me, it also helps to add dark colors as soon as possible because it helps me understand better how the end image should look like and if I need to make any adjustments to the initial design. At this point, I realized that my brush pen wasn't working well. This is one of those pens where the tip is kind of like a felt tip marker, except that it is pointy and the entire nib is flexible. So it allows you to have quite a bit more flexibility on the kind of shapes that you want to put onto paper. It might be because I haven't used this pen in a while and the ink has dried up. When coloring with this pen, there is ink coming out from the middle of the tip, but not the actual tip. But sometimes a little bit of ink comes out, so the tip makes the little scratches here and there on paper. It was very strange. So I had to press the brush pen hard onto the paper with the nib bent at 90 degrees just to get the part with ink in contact with the paper. This also resulted in a gap between the colored section and the outline. So after I have used the brush tip to color in the bulk of the area, I will go in afterwards with a lino pen and fill in the white gaps. I think the next time I start on a similar project, I'm going to get better pens. Still, it is kind of a waste to not finish the ones I have, so maybe I will use them both at the same time. So perhaps using the new pen for the edges and using the current one for the center. So at this point, I am alternating between drawing the lines and also inking in the color for the rest of this image. For the lines bit, I am using a 0.02 size nib, or maybe it is just 0.2. It gives just about the right thickness that I want. Now, one thing about these Sakura lino pens, and this is really just my comments after using them for the first time in what I would say many years, and I would say that it is a bit finicky. So depending on how much pressure you're pressing on the paper, the thickness of the line changes. Sometimes that's a good thing because it allows you to easily vary the thickness of the lines without having to keep switching between different pens. But it does mean that you have to be pretty aware of how strongly you're pressing the pen against the paper and be able to control that. If you press it too hard, then you're just going to get thicker lines than needed and your hands get super tired. So between adding the lines and coloring, I definitely think that coloring is easier. I don't have to worry about making any mistakes because I can cover those up. And psychologically, it is much more satisfying because I can finish work an area in a shorter amount of time. At some point, I also took out a piece of paper because I didn't want any oil from my hand getting onto the picture, and I didn't want to smudge the ink or get ink onto my hands, which then transfer on to the paper and ruin the image. One of those things that I didn't consider as much as I should have when I first started on this project was how long it would take. The pencil draft didn't actually take too long. It just took about as much time as I expected from the get-go, but the line art really took a lot longer. I definitely underestimated how much time it takes to get really nice and clean lines. I mentioned earlier that the drawing pressure matters. So with these pens, depending on the angle you're holding the pen at, the thickness of the lines that come out would be different as well. So if you hold the pen perpendicular to the paper in almost a 90 degrees upright position, it is going to give you a much thicker line compared to holding it at a 45-degree angle. So probably because the nib is almost like a blunt nib. The current one I'm using is the 0.2 nib, but at a 90-degree angle, it has the same thickness as the 0.8 tip. So it is quite a big difference. This is probably why I felt the whole outlining session was hard. I had to pick the right pen, I had to control the pressure I was holding it with, I had to make sure it's a consistent pressure. The angle I was holding the pen with matters, the speed with which I was drawing the line matters too, because it affects the thinness and thickness of the lines. This is most evident when I was drawing the floating spheres near her head. I was getting tired and the pen started taking a life of its own and started from the original pencil draft. The pencil circles looked great, but after tracing them with the pen, they came out looking crooked and slightly wonky. It was not very aesthetically pleasing. I did manage to fix this at the end by making the circles a lot thicker, just so to cover the crookedness of the original line art. So yeah, I definitely spent a lot more time. I also spent quite a bit of time resting my hand and also taking deep breaths before attempting to draw each line, so that every single stroke is really nice. And also halfway through, my fingers got really tired, so I had to go back and rest and continue the next day. This reminds me of how in Japan they make manga. I mean, nowadays they can do it on a computer, but in the past they must have done it manually using pen and paper, and I can't imagine how tiring it must be, because for manga that are published in serial magazines, you have to submit the drawings before the deadline. It's not like a hobby like this where I can take all the time in the world to make it. They have a deadline, so if the manga is published in a weekly magazine, it's a weekly deadline, which sounds really crazy. Like, what happens if they make a mistake? They must have a way to erase those mistakes without having to redraw the entire panel. So maybe since they have to scan the original drawing and then print it out onto the magazine, maybe they can use some kind of material like whiteout where the edit will be obvious when you are looking at the original draft, but not so much when it's printed out. If anyone has suggestions for other markers or line art pens that I could use, definitely suggest them in the comments below. I only have a few requirements. It must have permanent ink. Permanent in the sense that it should not start spreading when it comes into contact with water. Otherwise, it will be difficult to add any colors using watercolor after I'm done with the initial line art. And it's probably great if it comes in a variety of sizes. I have another pen that I really like and I use it often for drawings, but it's like super thick and it's impossible to just add thicker lines when using those pens. Overall, other than the pen issues, this was pretty fun. Adding in the background was almost a meditative kind of process. I know I just have this one singular task to do, which is to fill in the white spaces with a black, and I don't really have to think too much and just be completely focused on where my pen is landing on the page and how the ink just flows out to fill the parts that it is touching. And then slowly watch the dark parts of the picture expand and the entire image just slowly complete and take form before my eyes. So one thing that always stayed in the back of my mind when I am doing this particular project is to whether to leave things blank or actually add colors. So with this one, the problem is the only color that I want to add at this stage is black. So if I fill in the details with colors, I'm just going to end up losing those details. So at the end, I decided to apply black to only a few key areas. The face is definitely black because that was how it was in the original design in the game. I did decide to leave the background black as well to balance the dark and the light areas of the paper. Plus, it helps the wings to stand out from the background. Parts of her character, like her hair and the leaves in her hair, I'm going to just leave it as white. One thing that I did omit from the original design was those illegible scribbles on her clothing. So her entire form is basically covered with those scribbles. I had a reference image that I used, and looking at it, it was a bit blurred when it comes to the scribbles, so I had to check a different source. This character design is for this power called Pursuance, which is the EGO of the abnormality, the heavily Executor's Scribe, which also has its own character design. That takes the form of a white, humanoid, angelic looking being. It holds a scepter in one hand and the tablet in the other, and there are scribbles everywhere, including on the tablet, on the clothes, and on the stone basing it's sitting on. When I look closer at that, those almost look like Egyptian hieroglyphics, or they don't really use our Latin alphabets or like the Korean alphabet because it's a Korean game. Instead, it uses the Egyptian alphabet, which are just tiny pictures of symbols like birds and stuff. Now, these things are really tiny. I think I would have to draw a few hundred hieroglyphics just to cover her body, and it would be absolutely painstaking. So I just decided to leave it blank. It is a bit of a cop-out, but I don't feel like it detracts too much from the art, so I'm just going to leave it blank. At this point, I'm pretty much done with the drawing. I would say that the hardest part is the eye. There was absolutely no room for errors, and I had to really make sure that every line I create is smooth and in the right location. The clothes and hair are a lot easier because there is less precision involved. Even if I draw a line in the wrong place, it's not going to look like a mistake to the people looking at the image. And there are also ways to improvise and cover up the error completely if needed. The hair is just a teeny bit more difficult than the clothing because I wanted to capture the bounciness of the curls in her hair. I did realize after looking at a separate reference of the non-distorted version of the same power that Rodion's hair is actually a bit longer. I still like how this one turned out, but I'll keep in mind her hair length for the next painting that I do, if I do that. Then another feature of the characters is the chains around her body. There are no chains in the original distorted version and none in the EGO design, so these only appear in the distorted version. I think that's just like a really cool artistic touch to bring out how broken the character is now. The chains were pretty easy to draw. It's basically drawing rectangles and connecting them together, so I'll put rectangles on both sides of the previous one that I'm drawing. The only part that I needed to take note of was to make sure that the rectangles are not too perfect, because then they just look like rectangles and not like metal chains. But also making sure to avoid having the corners too round, because then it just looks really worn out, which is not the kind of chain. And then at the very end, I went in and added a bit more weight to the clothing just to give it a little bit more structure and reduce the amount of whiteness in the center to give the whole image a bit more balance. As mentioned at the start, I did want to use shimmery and metallic paints in this piece. So the artwork is pretty much completed as it is, with a good balance of colors, smooth lines, no obvious defects. So as it is, I think it's fairly complete. So looking at it, I want to make a version with those metallic paints. So I've had those paints for a while now. I hadn't had a chance to use them much because I just haven't found the opportunity to use them. I absolutely adore these paints, and this particular painting is just the perfect opportunity. So the palette has about 20 colors or so, and the one I'm going to use is the gold paint. I just thought that it will be a really good accent against the black background. Gold is also heavily used in religious paintings, which makes sense given the angelic motifs that underpin this design. In the original design, the eye was yellow, so making it gold and really reflective will definitely help to make it pop out even more. After I was done with the eye, it does look incomplete with only a small section having color, so I am also adding accents to the wings and the rings. The wings, I wanted to make it look like it could almost be like blood vessels, right? Or like veins on the leaves, just to the creepiness of the drawing. Overall, it was a pretty fun project. It was a bit tiring during the line work, but I had loads of fun and I get to use art materials which were lying around for a while. So this is also actually a precursor to another project that I'm going to make, which I will post on this channel at a later date. See ya then!